welcome. This is episode 7 of our live stream call-in audio experiment. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I want to begin. Actually, I want to talk about inspiration and influence, but before we get to that, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping around this show, this experiment, this whatever it is thing is that we're doing. And the question, what is this show, is something I seem to be asking myself a lot over the past, 6 weeks or so. And I think now that we've done 6 of these, again, I've tried to answer that for myself. At its core, I think I'd like it to be a forum for you and I to come together and talk about our lives, the things that inspire us and move us forward, and the things that occasionally keep us paralyzed until we can figure out a way around or through them. I love what we're doing together. I love this. As nervous as I am, as unsure as I am of what it's going to be from week to week, I love what we're doing. But I think there's a way forward that might help the episodes feel a little less random and maybe a little more purposeful. So what I think I'd like to do is fold Iterations, one of my other shows, into this show, and also bring it back as a newsletter, which is really how it started. For those of you who may not have listened to Iterations, it's basically my personal audio journal of things that I'm looking at or focused on at the moment. And that could be a particular artist or a book or a film I've seen or just something I'm trying to work through, creatively or otherwise. So this show will basically become Iterations Live. And I'll release it as 2 versions. The shorter version that's just the current iteration as they kind of exist now. And then the full version with the music, all the additional conversation, the call-ins, all of that. And I think the newsletter can act as sort of a bridge or, kind of the connective tissue for all of this, with thoughts around the previous shows, maybe a preview of upcoming topics that we're thinking about that might inspire some additional discussion beyond the calls and the in-show chat. And I've been noodling on this for quite a while. And I think bringing all of these things together will, again, not only gives the show some focus, but hopefully provide different ways to connect and communicate, and not just between you and me, but with each other, reinforcing the idea of sort of meeting people where they are. So I think that's the plan. But I'd love to hear from you about it, what you think of this idea. You can leave it in the comments. You can email me, talkback@jeffreysaddoris.com, or if you'd like to dive into it right now, give me a call, 202-539-0209. In the meantime, from his debut record, Days of Hunger, this is Geva, Alon.
Come on, rider, 'cause I long to talk to you. Come on, rider, 'cause your face are carved in blue. Since that day when I met you, paid the bill but wasn't through, and forever we are two. Come on, writer, 'cause I long to talk to you. I guess for you I'm just a face that has no name, just a pay and go away. But you left me out of clues, and forever we are two. Come on, writer, leave your eyes, leave your man, 'cause we all often give ourselves away for change. It always shines after the rains. Come on, cry for me your blues, and forever we are two. Da 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 da. Da 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 da
Geva Alon with Come On Rider. Feel free to call in anytime, whether I'm kind of ranting about something or not. I want this to be collaborative, so you don't have to wait for a song. You don't have to wait for anything really. So Adrianne and I were on a walk. Gosh, I don't remember if it was Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, and I was telling her how grateful I was to have so many interests, especially in a time when we're all pretty limited in where we can go. I mean, there's only so much inspiration you can garner from the grocery store or the little pupusa place around the corner where we sometimes go to get takeout. And Adrianne is a sociologist and likes to remind me that we, all of us, are largely products of our influences and social environments. And as I thought about that a little bit, I realized that that's absolutely true for me. The environment that I grew up in, 100% contributed both directly and indirectly, not only to the things that I'm interested in, but also to whatever skills or abilities I may have in a given area. I was lucky that I had this group of people around me from a really early age who each excelled in a different area of creativity. My mom was an amazing seamstress, which she learned from her grandmother, who made all of the elaborate dance costumes that she and her brother Jerry wore on stage. She was a dancer for years, and they were incredible costumes, and she sort of passed that skill on to my mom. My dad was brilliant at figuring out machinery and how things worked and went together, especially engines. He could see exploded views of things in his head almost intuitively, and often was able to make whatever thing he was working on better. My stepmother, who entered the scene, let's see, my parents got divorced when I was 4, and my father, I think my dad started seeing her when she was 5, and she became my stepmother not long after. I don't have a memory without her, really. And she was amazing in all sorts of areas. She was she still is a painter, and was really the first one who taught me how to really think about color beyond what was in my box of crayons, right? I'd been drawing with pencil as far back as I can remember, but she introduced me to watercolor and acrylics and oils and how to see how colors relate to one another. And to see sort of color harmony, and got me started. And I mean, obviously I was very young, so I wasn't ready for color theory yet, but she was really helpful in helping me to see in that respect. And as you know, later in life, one of my instructors in college would say a lot, you know, making great art is really boils down to having the ability to see. And it's something that obviously I'm still working at. And so in addition to her, there were other people around. Her father, what would he be? My step-grandfather, I guess. He was a photographer, as was his brother and best friend. His brother was a journalist, and his best friend, Harry, was an architectural photographer. And just as a side note, it was the largest camera I'd ever seen. He used this camera. It was called a Linhof Aerotechnica. And it was a 4x5 roll film camera. And the thing was enormous. And it had this vacuum pump that you had to, like, the camera was this monstrous thing, and then this vacuum pump you kind of slung off to the side, and that would hold the film flat against the film plane as he was, you know, hanging out of helicopters shooting these architectural photographs. But all of these things, you know, being in the darkroom for the first time, my grandfather handed me his yashika mat loaded with Triax and said, you know, go make some pictures. And I remember that feeling, developing that roll of film, being in the darkroom, seeing those photographs fade up in the tray of developer. I was hooked. And I've been on this sort of photographic journey for, God, more than 4 decades, you know, and there's so much more that I could talk about, but I think you get the point where the influences were there to kind of plant the seed of where things were going or where they could go. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear some of your early influences or even recent influences. I think all of us are, especially with where things are going with COVID, are really looking for ways to stay inspired and stay motivated and stay kind of in the zone of making. So I think what I'm going to do is I might play one more song while folks are still getting kind of settled. And then we'll talk a little bit about inspiration, because I think inspiration and influence, while they do overlap, there are some differences. You know what? Let's just keep going, because I think they're so related. Why break it up at the moment? But if you do want to call in, 202-539-0209. So if that covers the kind of influence, at least for me, the childhood influence, where does inspiration come from, and how are they related? And I can't answer that for you, but I can answer it for me. And those early influences, they were also sources of inspiration. And often it wasn't direct. In fact, more often than not, it was probably indirect. Often it was just me being exposed to those people being creative, whether that meant watching Linda paint or being in the darkroom with Joe and watching him process film and ask questions while that was going on, or helping, and I'm going to use my air quotes, helping my dad in the garage, which often just meant staying out of his way. But seeing what he was working on and questioning. I do remember asking questions from a very early age. So part of their influence was just, how would I say it? Almost to prime me to seek out more inspiration, to start looking at the world around me through a lens where I started to realize that everything was made. Everything had to be thought about and made by someone. And those makers maybe started out like me in just thinking about these concepts. And there was this realization that my immediate sphere, right, the people that I mentioned and some others, were all makers. They all contributed to putting something out into the world, right? And what happened was that I started finding things that interested me. I started finding things that I became more and more curious about. And that's where things really started to get interesting and change. But again, I want to hear from you. I'm going to play another song, 202-539-0209. This is a quick one. This is only like a 2-minute song. So, get to calling. This is PhD by Phil David. PhD by Phil David. That always reminds me, that song reminds me of, do you remember The Art of Noise? Do you remember them? Got a call. Let's take this. Oh, I know who this is. I know who this is.
Yeah, you do.
Did I offend?
No, you didn't offend.
Do you have a sociologist perspective on what I'm saying that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, just
this is
briefly.
Adrianne, by the way. This is
Adrianne, by the way. Yeah,
Adrianne.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to what you said, and I think you sort of captured it really well. And one of the reasons that I'm glad you talked about that is because I think you sometimes either underestimate or don't realize how fortunate you were to have so many and such varied influences like that as a young person. So there are many, many things, I think, in your background and in your upbringing that some of them only recently, over the past few years, some before we met, but some, I think, since we've met, that you've been thinking about more and realizing just how influential they have been on you. And I've told you many times that there are lots of things about time, the place, the surroundings, the people that you grew up with that are really kind of kick ass. And I think, I think it can be hard to see, hard to have perspective on the things that we take for granted, or that felt just natural and typical to us.
Well, and I think that's a big part of it. Is it did feel so natural that everybody around me was interesting and doing something.
Right. And I remember on a different but related conversation we had once, we were talking about going to museums. And you being in Southern California, or the first time we saw art, I think. And I think I remember that your experience was much, 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 much earlier than mine. In addition to the art and the creative things that were happening around you.
Right.
You
I think I was 9.
were in an area, where you had museums near you. You could be exposed to capital I important art.
Right.
In addition to the creativity that you were surrounded by, which is so different from me, because I was in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And I think did not get to a museum proper until high school, and maybe not even maybe during the first time I traveled internationally in high school.
Right.
Even so I think those, the early influences and being surrounded by all that stuff is really fundamental to who you are and how you are in the world.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, each of those, I can say each of those things each of those people, rather, their skills, their abilities became some sort of deep dive, right? Each one became a way for me to kind of latch on to something and drill down and soak up as much as I could in that thing, whatever that thing was, until the next thing caught my attention. And that happened a lot. I mean, it still happens, right? But I was always encouraged to do that. I was never told, hey, find one thing and stick with that. I was never told that. And I think that helped me value curiosity and sort of learning and the exploration, those skills or those abilities for their own sake, right? Apart from any sort of end game, right? Just in and of themselves, that those things have value, that being curious has value, that wanting to learn about something that you don't know about, even if it doesn't go anywhere, even if you don't end up. Now, my dad was a little different about that, I must say. My dad, even though he never really said do one thing, he never really encouraged art. Well, I mean, let's face it, he discouraged it actively, right? I got many of those artists are a dime a dozen speeches, and you're never going to amount to anything if that's what you pursue, and all that kind of stuff. For him, it was, pursue engineering, something with a pension, something with benefits, blah, 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 right? But I still feel grateful.
Yeah, it certainly seems like he was very practical.
He was very practical until, ironically, until later in his life when he ended up becoming a metal sculptor and taking all of that practical knowledge, all those practical skills that he had developed, working in sheet metal factories and working with sort of, yes, the practical side of things, but then being able to somewhat change his lens and see the value in something that was aesthetic. Now, it still had to be functional. He could never let go of making something for the sake of making something. It still had to have some sort of function to it. And even the way it was kind of funny. I've told you this before. Even the way he priced everything, the way my dad used to price the art, quote unquote, that he made was he would determine how many inches or how many square feet or how many linear feet of metal he had in a project, and he would add 10%, and that was it. That's how much it cost. There was no value in the way something looked. There was only the material cost and labor of making that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the design, the creativity, the aesthetic work was not to be monetized. I mean, and you said that he was very. It did not compute when you would bring ideas to him for decorative things or more art. I mean, you have notebooks of things that you designed, and he just couldn't wrap his head around them.
No, he was happy making key hooks and paper towel holders with cocopellis and coyotes on them. Like he just couldn't see past any of that into, you don't get it. People will pay X number of dollars for this thing. And he would go, well, I wouldn't pay that. I'm like, well, you're not your audience. Right. And that's a hard thing to learn. If we want to talk about the sort of practical side of art and design, especially design, that was one of the hardest things to learn is you are not your audience. So don't design for you. If you're making a product, part of the success of that product is making a product that lots of people are going to like. If you're going to the mountaintop and painting or writing poetry or producing podcasts that you don't intend to monetize or don't care if they find an audience, then do whatever you want. But if the thing that you're doing depends, if you depend on an audience for the thing that you're doing, then you have to approach it slightly differently. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. That, finding that territory between what you are moved to create and what kind of market there is or level of, it's that overlap between supply and demand.
Right. Right. And
I mean,
go ahead.
No, you.
Well, I was just going to say, and part of, you and I were kind of joking about that Maisel quote earlier. Part of why my dad didn't ever really make anything interesting from an artistic standpoint is he wasn't a very interesting person, right? Like he was a pretty basic person. He didn't think about a lot of this stuff. He thought about how things worked and why they worked, but he didn't think about art and the aesthetics of how things look versus how they work, right? So for him,
absolutely.
he couldn't understand how I could pursue that as a career because for him that had no value. So in a weird way, that's not so weird, I guess, because I put so much into those things, to him, I had no value.
Yeah, because you had such different imaginations and ideas about what mattered.
Yes.
And why.
Yes.
What was valid, what was valuable, and why.
And he couldn't see that all of this is connected. He couldn't see that the form, the function, the art, the science, the front side and the back side, he couldn't see that all of that stuff was connected. All he could see was this very narrow scope. And I think that as the creative markets change, and we've seen, Bill and I talked about a changing photographic market years ago, before coronavirus even, happened, years before it happened, and how photography was changing and how creativity was changing and how the quest for content in whatever form that took, on a large level, at least at a certain sort of strata, replaced art. We saw a lot of people who were producing really great stuff, but then that wasn't getting the notice. That wasn't getting the sponsorship dollars. That wasn't getting the likes, the follows, et cetera. And they shifted their focus and started talking about gear because that's where the conversation was. That's where more people were checking, sort of tuning in, right? And I mentioned earlier that sort of meeting people where they are. Well, unfortunately, if we're talking about photography, a huge number of people are meeting at the gear space. And that's why you see a lot of these sites that are really sort of gear focused and they're leaving the art behind.
Yeah, and that's part of what can be monetized. I mean, it all has to do, it brings up sort of the monetization of creativity.
Sure.
And how that has changed over time, both for makers and as a market. But yeah, I think that even though your dad's perspective on creativity and art was very, very limited, I think you recognize and still got something hugely valuable from his engineering type of mindset that has been a good foil for you, because that's one of the reasons why OTP was never a gear show.
Right.
But you and Bill still talked plenty about gear and about computers and about the math and the science behind photography as well. Like, you can play in that space.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked for an hour the other day about network storage, and it was we do that. We did that. So your dad's influence, I think, was also valuable because it complemented all those other sort of highly creative influences to a point that
you had.
Yeah. I mean, again, he couldn't, I was looking so far afield at how these things could connect, and all he could see was right in front of him. And if he couldn't get some sort of return on it, then it was, it wasn't valuable. And I don't blame him as a person.
His head around it immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. But he came from this very sort of, for those of you who don't know, my family were all railroad men, 4 generations of railroad men, and I was the first male in our family in 4 generations not to work for the railroad. And it was something that my dad, it disappointed him for the majority of my life. I mean, I think it was only the last several years where he really, I think, could get past it, because he couldn't, and I've said this before, he couldn't understand that who was I telling about this the other day? He couldn't understand that it's not that it wasn't good enough for me, that life. It just wasn't for me. He couldn't understand that distinction. It was, it's good enough for your grandfather, it's good enough for your father, like all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't a value proposition. It wasn't that it's that what I've chosen is better, full stop, or better objectively. It's what I've chosen is better for me. It's my path. This is what I get to do. Sink or swim. So 202-539-0209 if you want to chime in on this, and I know you do. Somebody out there does.
Yeah, I would love to hear about the influences that other people had or did not, because to jump back to an earlier reflection, I have told you many times that there are a number of characteristics about kind of your upbringing, including having all these creative influences around you, that I frankly am envious about, because it's very different from my own experience. And so to be surrounded by and to be encouraged to be curious and creative and explore and all of those things, and what tremendous gifts they were. I mean, you could imagine yourself and you could feel yourself drawn to do those things.
Right. It was only later that I became so self-deprecating.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's yeah. You know, I forgot to mention, if you're outside the country, you can Skype me at Saddoris if you don't want to call in. I forgot about that. I always forget that it's the same application. Anyway, yeah, it's interesting, and you know, what did you say to me earlier when we were talking about this? You said something that was so good. Oh, I know what you said. You said creativity is answering the call to curiosity. Isn't that great? Like, I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying it to like people that are listening. Isn't that great? Creativity is answering the call. And maybe better is answering your call, right? Because it's personal to you. Creativity is answering your call to curiosity. Opening your senses, being present wherever that happens to lead you. And for me, either fortunately or unfortunately, it leads in a bunch of different directions. You said you talked about envy a little bit ago. I am often envious of people who knew what they wanted to do or happened upon something that took hold of them so tightly that that's the only thing they wanted to do. That's what they had to do. And it's what they're really, really good at, right? I mean, I would love to do a series of conversations with people, and I've got a few in mind, but people who found that thing, right, that lights them up, and that's all they've ever done, right? No, Tony Hawk is
that sense of a calling.
Yes, Tony Hawk is probably the first one on the list. Tony Hawk has only ever ridden a skateboard, never had a job. He found that early on. That's what he did. Alex Lifeson from Rush, well, Geddy Lee from Rush, people that, and there are sports, I'm sure, personalities. There are chefs. Paul Hollywood, his father famously was a baker. I would love to talk to Paul Hollywood and ask him how much of a say did he have in going into the family business as a baker, and what does it feel like having eclipsed anything that his father accomplished publicly anyway. We don't know, there could be a different measure of that, but publicly as a businessman, as a celebrity, that kind of thing. How does that affect how he approaches his work? That kind of thing. I think that series of people finding what they dig early on, and that's the only thing they've ever done their whole lives, would be a fascinating series.
Yeah, I agree. Somebody could make the case that to some extent you have too. It's just the constellation of things that fit in. You have a creative portfolio or a constellation of creative things that you do. So you found your calling, but your bucket might have a slightly bigger diameter to it.
But you know what? If I'm being completely honest, and I've told you this before, I don't feel like I'm really good at anything. I feel like I'm good at a lot of things, but I don't feel like I'm really superb, really sort of top of the game at any one thing, partially because I didn't put 20, 30, 40 years of intense focus, concentration, and purposeful practice into that one thing, right? I spread myself all over the place, and I kept bouncing between things. And yes, they're all related, and as a result of that, maybe I've got a wider field to choose from, but I don't feel that I've got that one sort of specialization. Although maybe, I don't know, maybe talking to people, maybe that's why I love, I know it's not, maybe it is. It's one of the reasons I love doing podcasts. It's one of the reasons that I love talking to people, because I feel like my background allows me to at least have a conversation with pretty much anybody. I may not get 100% what you're saying, right? If you're in some specialized field, but I think I can probably carry a conversation or invite a conversation from pretty much anybody, I think.
And you love that. You enjoy that.
I do.
It is one of your superpowers.
It's fuel. Yeah, I do love that. phones are quiet today, huh? 202-539-0209. I know somebody's out there. Somebody's got to say, hey, I think I'll call.
I think they're listening and thinking.
Thinking, what is this idiot talking about? That's what they're thinking.
No, they're probably processing, what that looks like for them.
Hold on.
You and I
Hold
talk
on.
about it a lot. Yeah.
Andre's calling in. I'm going to patch him in. Andre. Are you there? Andre?
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, we have a terrible connection.
You?
Mm-hmm. Really bad.
Oh, wow.
I wonder if it's because I've patched you in with Adrianne. What do you think?
I'll drop out. I'll drop out and see if the quality improves.
Yeah, Andre, hang up and call me right back, okay?
Right.
Are you going to hang up too, Adrianne?
Yep.
Okay. Let's all try this again.
All right.
All right, let's see if we can. I don't know if it's bandwidth. It could be Skype. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that Skype shit the bed. All right, let's try this again. Andre.
Hello.
Oh, no, it's not any better. It sounds very. You know how sometimes when we were playing Warzone where you would sound like an android?
Oh, I don't know what's going on. My internet's wired. Should be alright.
Are you downloading the latest 250 meg?
If I download? No.
Gig.
I've been updating my Photoshop and Lightroom, but that's finished, and that's the only thing that was going on here. I got 90 megs a second here.
No, it sounds awful.
Horrible. Alright, should I try next week?
Yeah, if you've got something, type it in the chat and I'll address it there. But our connection's not real good.
I can hear you perfectly, though.
Really?
Let me try something here.
Yeah, you sound like you've got a
What if
robot
I boost
voice.
the mic?
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Nope. Here, you know what? Hang up. I'll try calling you. Let me call you. Oh, Skype. Don't we love Skype? Say no. Let's see.
Hello.
All right, third time. Not a charm. No, not a charm. Type it out in the chat, and I'll try and get to it. Well, try. Of course, I'll get to it. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Oh, Skype. There's got to be a better thing. Why hasn't anyone come up with a better solution than Skype for this kind of thing? Yeah, quality is leaving a lot to be desired. Let me see if Andre will type something in the chat. Yeah, all of this stuff is connected, and it's, I think, just how we kind of respond to it and deal with it. For me, as Adrianne said, I had a lot of opportunity for doing different things, and I mean, I learned to weld when I was 10. My dad started me with oxyacetylene, and then we went to arc welding, and then MIG welding. I never could get TIG welding. I couldn't get the TIG welding. You have to use your feet and your hands because there's a foot switch that controls voltage, and you got to feed this tungsten rod in. I never could get it. But MIG, I'm good. Yeah. And then there were the people that advocated for me. In high school, I had an art teacher named Mr. Andrew, and I really wanted to go to Art Center in Pasadena more than pretty much anything I could even think about at the time. They had an incredible photography program. They had an incredible art program, probably the best transportation design program in the country, and just a phenomenal school, Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. And it was just incredibly expensive. I think at the time, and this was when I was in high school, it was $40,000 a year. So translate that into $20. That's a lot of money. Anyway, they had a series of Saturday illustration classes, and you could sign up for these illustration classes, or they gave away scholarships to them. And one of them was with this woman who was an animator at Disney. And I wanted to go there again, but I couldn't. We couldn't afford it. And my art teacher in high school, Mr. Andrew, unbeknownst to me, submitted a portfolio of my work, and they selected me. So I got this scholarship of classes, and not only that, because my mom was working, he and his wife drove me to Art Center from where we lived in Upland, California, which is about 30, 40 minutes each way. But that level of sort of belief in a student and dedication to helping me to achieve something that at the time was very important to me, I think was its own source of inspiration, right? Because you want to make these people proud of you. You want to, at least I wanted to feel like I earned his attention. I wanted to feel like I earned his belief in me. And, I do definitely feel lucky to have some of those people in my corner. I got a message from Patrick. You know what? I'm going to play one more song, and let's see if Patrick's still around. We'll see what he's got to say. He's always got something crazy to say. This is, what is this? Oh, let's play this. This is called Few Things, and this is by Alex Keren. Be back in a bit.
DJ prerogative.
That is indeed my prerogative. All right, that was Few
Your
Things.
DJ prerogative.
That is my DJ prerogative, yeah. That was Few Things by Alex Keren. Just as a reminder, if you dig the music from any of these shows, well, the last two shows, starting with last episode and this episode, this is all from artlist.io, which I have been loving these past couple weeks, looking through their catalog of music. I mean, it's hard to choose. It really is, because they've got so much stuff that I'm really finding myself either really digging or not really understanding, but wanting to play anyway because it's a little out of my comfort zone. But I can't say enough about them. I love it. Artlist.io. There will be links in the show notes. And if you do sign up, you get 2 weeks extra free when you sign up for one of their subscription plans. Yeah. So, what's up, Shipstad?
Hey, what?
Hey, did you get the new tattoo, by the way? Did you get it?
The one of your face?
Well, no, of the face I drew of you.
Oh, the one you drew of me. Oh, yeah. No, that's. But I was thinking about it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I was telling Adrianne about that site, how much fun we had with that.
Yeah, for those who are just tuning in now, Jeffrey did a character of me for a Flash site back in the late 90s ish.
No, it was after 2000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he did a kind of a lounge smoking jacket, fez wearing
kind of a Hugh Hefner meets Shag kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you know, I still have like swag from that, the mug. And
did the mouse pad finally give up the ghost? Because it was pretty sketchy.
It's tired. It's tired, but it's hard to let go of.
Patrick has the most insane collection, just as a complete non sequitur, has the most insane collection of amazing art and like mid-century artifacts of probably anybody that I know.
That includes friends like you.
Oh, there it is.
Well, no, but that's
I'm barely mid-century, aren't I?
I have. Well, no, but I mean classic old things and classic old friends who have been around for a long time.
Nice save.
Good thing. No, it's true.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. Darren Hall just said in the notes. He says that doesn't sound like stock music, and I have to agree with that because when I had tuned in, you were playing something, and I went, oh, that's. It was. I think it might have been the second thing you played, and I go, "That sounds like Art of Noise."
Yeah.
Remember Art of Noise?
Yeah, I do. I said that,
and it was really cool.
Yeah, it's a song called PhD by Phil David, and they've got a ton of stuff on there that, like, I played a song last week that sounded like Beck, and yeah, there's some great stuff. So yeah, it doesn't
I'll
sound
have
like
to
stock.
check them out because I forgot that you were going to be using their stuff, and my mind just went to, oh, who's that artist? This is cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool.
Yeah, it was one of the reasons. Frankly, it's one of the reasons I approached them is because a lot of their stuff doesn't sound like just oh, that sounds like presentation music or whatever, or that sounds like oh look, uplifting video clip number 4, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you remember I worked for Smart Sound for 2 years?
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I did some of the design work for their covers.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
See how it's all connected? See, this is exactly what I mean. 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you listen to this. Do you find that this rings true for you? That a lot of these things, because you have got a ton of different interests as well. Do you find that one sort of feeds off of another, or how do you kind of determine what influences you and what inspires you? Are those different for you?
I think they, influence and inspiration. I think an inspiration has to migrate or turn into an influence. Does that make sense? So you get inspired by something, and then it's only an influence once you've taken it and run with it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think it's opposite of how it kind of happened for me, because I experienced all these people, their process influencing me to then pursue what I found interesting, and then deep diving that, and that's where the inspiration come from. Do you know what I mean? Like the process
right,
itself was it influenced me. I get where you're coming from. It didn't influence my work, but it influenced what I became interested in, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, I think it actually can be a two-sided coin in that if you're influenced by something, it will inspire you to do something or inspire an idea.
Right.
Or something. So I see it's a little bit interchangeable that way.
What have been some of the unexpected either inspirations or influences on you creatively?
With photography, I think I am all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, you know my stuff, but I can't necessarily look at it and go, oh, that's so-and-so, or this is that person.
Right.
And you know what I mean? Where you can pick out, notes or something. Like, I love Rankin. I love, Annie Leibovitz and Jill Greenberg. And there's so many different people I love, but I don't think you'd look at my stuff and you go, oh, there's that, or there's this.
You don't see any of their influence on your work?
No. I mean, I think we can think back, to when we saw something and go, ooh, I like that. I like that about, this, about this creativity of their lighting or the way they set up things or something. And then you just kind of like, you want to trickle that into your own work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you look at what you're doing with your textured art now, can you personally see notes of inspiration? You go, well, I got that specifically from there. I got this specifically from that other place. And then you combined it all and made it your own. Or
not directly, I don't think.
Right.
Not directly.
Okay, here's another question. So could anybody else who's familiar in your mediums say, oh, this Jeffrey's layered political artwork is very reminiscent of somebody else that they could point it to, and I could look at the two and go, oh, I can see that.
Yeah. Maybe just in terms of process and technique, if there's any sort of fringe, it may be somebody like Say Adams, although he is much, much better than I am, both technically and aesthetically. But we use similar techniques. In terms of trying to combine politics in art, I don't know that he's directly influenced me or inspired me, but I am a huge fan of his work, and that's Shepard Fairey.
Of course, yes.
Phenomenal work. And I think that, I don't think Shepard gets enough of the credit that he deserves for moving sort of pop art, political art forward. I mean, he's the sticker guy. He's the Obey Giant guy. And that's fine because that was this, in his words, it was this experiment in phenomenology. And I think it was wildly successful. But if you look at just how his technique has evolved, and I've been lucky enough to talk to him a few times just at openings, he's making really complicated stuff. Like he's not only is he hand cutting a lot of this stuff, but then, he's hand cutting the originals, but then also going in and making these massively detailed Illustrator files that are used to produce the screens to screen print these things. And there's just layer upon layer, and they're just technically massively complicated. I got to talk to another person that works with some of his stuff. And so I have this massive amount of respect for what he's doing. But if you get anywhere close to his aesthetic, it's immediate. It's immediate who you're riffing on.
Exactly. Do you think his how he's evolved, his more complicated stuff has lost an audience of the more simple stuff? The hope stuff. You know what I'm saying?
That's a good question. And while I appreciate the 5, 6, 7 color screen prints that he's doing now, I appreciate the complexity and how he's trying to push his own skill forward and push his medium forward. I find the stuff, because I've got, I don't know, half a dozen pieces by him, and I find the stuff from like 2005, 2006, 2007, up to maybe 2010 or 11. I find those pieces more compelling for me. Mm-hmm. I've got one called Mujer Fatal, which is just so beautiful in its simplicity, that I think that, artistically, it's creatively, design-wise, it's very difficult to do simple, right? Because there's nothing to hide behind. And I think, his stuff, he did it really well, does it really well. And when you see his originals in person, the silk screens, it's not that they pale in comparison because they're still impressive, but you get to see the little details and the intricacies of that background substrate that he makes, which is made up of his own patterns and pieces that, he owns every bit of that process from start to finish. Mm. And I have massive amounts of respect for that. Same thing with somebody like David Carson, who repurposes a lot of his previous posters for design conferences that he's spoken at, and he'll tear those things apart and recombine them into new collage work, into new design work, into new pieces of art. But he owns that entire process, right, start to finish. Mm-hmm. And that I have massive amounts of respect for, both from a process standpoint.
He owns it in the art space, meaning if anybody else comes close to doing what he's doing, it's so separate, it's so recognizable to him that anybody who wants to even just jump into that space at all looks like they're imitating.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. By owning that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so.
It's interesting because you were talking with Adrianne about inspiration for sale, so to speak, within the gear thing. But in addition to all the tutorials and stuff on gear, we in the last 10 years we've seen this explosion of photo courses.
Sure.
And,
Creative Live and Flern and absolutely.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm a huge education junkie when it comes to photography, and I've got 5 zillion paid courses that I take just because I'm always looking to learn something, a nugget of something. So there's a company called Pro EDU. They used to be RGG EDU. Mm-hmm. They're really high end, really, really good photographers that have tutorials, and you'll see that they've sponsored these courses by somebody like Chris Knight. Do you know who Chris Knight is?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and phenomenal photographer. But he kind of coined this look the same way like how Jake Hicks coined this look of colored gels, and it's like he does it. It's like you look at his stuff and you immediately know who it is. Mm-hmm. And
like Heisler is the same way. Greg Heisler does that similar sort of very colorful. Yeah.
Right. And so then what I start to see when I'm after these things start coming out within the year, I'm seeing stuff these on the feed and Instagram. I'm seeing these exact setups that Chris Knight does when he's doing the little smoky room and somebody's standing on a ladder, and then there's an old Hollywood light with a practical light in there, like they're on a stage, and just so many photographers just doing that note for note. It's not just like, it looks like he was inspired by this. I mean, they're getting the same props, the same sets, the same backgrounds and everything, and it's that thing of like I was asking you, do you see notes of your inspiration versus do you see something that you go, that's note for note?
Right. Yeah, I don't see that in my own work because I don't think that's inspiration. I think yes, if you want to produce that kind of work, I guess you can do it, but I don't know that there's any growth there. I don't know that there's. I mean, remember when we used to see some of the early work from Joey L. when he was shooting like indie bands when he was 16, 17. Look at his work now. It is phenomenal. There is an absolutely quantifiable trajectory in quality of his work, in interestingness of his work.
Yeah.
And where that came from, I have no idea. But it's not just him riffing on somebody else, And I think that can be valuable while you're learning, I guess. But you've got to let it bubble through you. And this is one of the things that makes you the kind of photographer that you are, is you are willing to watch every tutorial, read the books, take the courses, if you can glean one little nugget that sends you in a different direction, one little thing that you didn't think about before. And you did that with Joey. You did it with Zach Arias. You did it with McNally. I mean, you've done it with all of these people. Carl Taylor, who.
Oh, Carl Taylor, of course. I mean, just talk about an amazing influence and amazing photographer. Yes, thank you. Yes, but I'm not looking. But I don't see any of my own creative setups and whatever in any of that. When I'm looking at those, I'm always looking to let the technical take a complete backseat, so I'm not worrying about how to do something. I've got that tool shed in the back of my brain of how to work through something and just make it happen. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Get to the point where you're not thinking about the process so much. You just think about how am I going to create it and bring it to life.
Right. And you've got to let go at some point. Let go and trust that Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not being so technically good that you're sterile. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And you yes, it's technically good, but does it have any feeling? Is there anything, and getting back to, the Chris, Knight stuff and whatever. I'm not knocking anybody for doing that because
no, not at all.
Because I get it. Like when I was learning guitar, or like a lot. I mean, anybody learning an instrument and stuff, especially guitar. When you first pick it up, you're wanting to learn the songs that inspire you. You go, I'm gonna learn that Van Halen song, or I'm going to learn that whatever, and then I want to learn that solo, and then you learn that solo note for note, and you practice it.
Which polka did you learn first?
Right, but then what?
I said, which polka did you learn first?
If I had the money for an accordion, I might have. I had the Lederhosen, right. But just didn't have. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We when we're as musicians, you play along with the records and whatever, and you learn how to play the songs of the people you love and admire, and quite often you do it note for note because you're not saying, well, I want to do my version. Right,
but you're not going to release that as an LP, or you're not going to put that out as
exactly. So that's, to your point, that how have you taken your influences? Like I can listen to the music I do or guitar solos I do, and I'd be like, I kind of got that lick from. I remember that I was influenced by this or I was influenced by that. Mm-hmm. But it's not like to one of previous conversations where you're talking about Greta Van Fleet and you're going like, oh come on, that's not notes of inspiration. Right. That's a Van Halen. That's a Led Zeppelin. Tribute thing almost.
Yeah.
So, but with whether it's your painting or whether it's photography or something, we do get it influenced by something. But to your point, and I certainly agree, is that when you put it out there, it can't look like Shepard Fairey. It can't look like, it's got to have your own flavor to it. Otherwise, you're just at this point especially if something's so recognizable, you're just copying it and putting it out there.
Right.
And at what point do you use that as your own voice? I mean,
it's hard. I mean, it's hard to let those things filter into something new. right? Into something that is unique and different, and also satisfies you creatively as the maker of that thing, right? I mean, I'm sure that you've got bodies of work where you go, yeah, technically that was really good. It hit the mark where I wanted it to go, but it's just not where I wanted to go aesthetically, or vice versa. Maybe there's something conceptually that you've done that you really dig, but you just haven't figured out how you want to do it technically. So you still need to go back to the lab. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I've got dozens of concepts and things, and my closet is full of wardrobe and props and whatever stuff that still hasn't been done. And sometimes it'll take, it's casting. It's just finding the right person you want for the concept to sell it. It's like anything. You can have a great script, but if you put the wrong person in front of that camera, it can kill it.
Right.
I'm sure you have things that you have worked through and gone back to and put aside and then came back to, and or there might be things you just go, I got inspired and I ripped through that on the weekend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, both can happen. I finished a painting today that I started a year ago. I built the canvas, or I built the panel for it a year ago, and I've painted over it. This is the third time I've painted over the panel because I just couldn't get it. I couldn't see it.
The flag one?
Yeah.
The flag shot?
Yeah.
Flag shot. I call it a shot. So.
Well, it will be.
I saw a shot of the.
Yeah. I mean,
it looks. I'm sure it looks even better in person.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it does. Even over the past, the past sort of version of it. It's conceptually, it's the last version of it was conceptually the same, but technically, it just wasn't. I didn't hit the mark. It didn't have. It wasn't right. It wasn't the right stuff. If you squint your eyes and back up a little bit, sort of, again, conceptually, it looks the same, but I want things. My goal with every piece that I make is for there to be kind of two different experiences when you view it. There's the experience viewing it sort of at distance, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 feet, whatever it is, as you would see it sort of passing it on the wall. But then as you get closer, I want to show you things that you didn't notice before, little bits of ephemera or little details that can't be seen from 6, 8 feet away. That's kind of the goal of it. And if I don't hit that mark, I've learned that it's okay for me to start again. Isn't that the beauty of initially doing something for yourself, though, is that you don't have to rush it out. Right. And especially if you're not, you're not thinking in your head, you go, I got to get this out for the gram. Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I
No.
I got it. It's like, no. You go, this is going to hang as long as it needs to till I feel like it's where I want it to be.
First of all, I would never refer to it as the gram. That's the other thing. Yeah.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
I'm not as hip as you. I still got to stick with the Insta.
Yeah, but you still tell me to smash that like button.
And yet you don't.
I gently caress it, and then it clicks.
There you go.
But yeah, I think I applaud your keeping something to yourself and speak until you feel good about putting it out, because at the end of the day, when you lay your head on the pillow, you go, I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
And then
if it even goes out,
then you present it.
I mean, you and I have talked about a bunch of stuff that we've both done that will never see the light of day for whatever reason. And it kind of goes back to that Walter Mitty moment where Sean Penn's like, sometimes I don't take it, where they're looking at the snow leopard. Sometimes I don't take the photo. I just want to experience it for me. And I think anybody who makes anything has probably a ton of those things stored away in their home or office or garage or studio somewhere, that you made these things just for you. It was an experiment. Mm-hmm. It was an exercise. It just doesn't need to be shown, for whatever reason. But there was still process there. There was still intent. There was still inspiration. There was still influence. There was still all of these things that we're talking about working through. but you get to decide when and where or if that sees the light of day.
You know what rarely sees the light of day? Stuff I get hired to do.
The commercial stuff. Really?
Stuff I get. No, not necessarily the commercial stuff. Whether it's a headshot or something or something where it's somebody else's or a family shot or something.
Yeah.
You know, photos like that where I also felt like, or if somebody comes to me and say, I want a shot for this, and I have some ideas for it, and they go, no, give me something like this. And I go like, I did not get to put my personal stamp on it, and they pulled me back from my inspiration. So instead of like, you know, going to somebody and saying, I want your take on it because I love your art. It's like me going to Shag and saying, hey Shag, I want to commission something from you, but I do not like this. No, do it more like
I want to commission it and art direct it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then so in those instances where somebody has come to me and they've kind of dictated what they wanted, and I look at it at the end and I say, that says nothing new to me, for me at all, for my portfolio or whatever.
Right. And
not that you can't have like stuff, but if I don't feel like I would put it out there myself, or wasn't my idea that I felt was, you know, as good as it could be, not that it wasn't executed well, but it didn't move me. I go, yeah, it was done. It was fine. It was competent. Looks great. Whatever.
Right.
And so, you know, when, like you said, when other people have the ability, because they've paid you for something, to dictate a little bit of how it comes out, that's quite often is when I feel like it takes away my stamp on it,
right?
Or my, you know. Well,
it's less you.
Whereas,
the end product becomes less you.
Yeah, and so much more. You know, almost everything in my damn portfolio is just non-paid stuff that I did for myself because this is what I wanted to put out there, and I don't care at all about that.
Right.
It's more about, you know, the integrity of me putting out stuff that, you know, they say put in your portfolio things you want to get hired to do, things you want to, you know. Yeah, and I think that's true. Whether it happens or not, you know, good luck. I hope it does.
Right.
But I still don't want to put stuff out there that I feel like as it was not genuinely, you know, mine.
Right.
Or, you know.
Yeah. Well, we're running a little long, so I think.
All right.
I think we can wrap it there. But hey, we're here next week.
Always a good time.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to call in. I appreciate it.
All right. Don't forget to smash that like button.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right. Talk to you soon,
All
brother.
right. Talk soon. See you.
Bye.
Oh, what a character. Well, I think we're gonna call this episode. We're at a little over an hour and 15. Wow, we're almost at an hour and 20. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. Subscribe, like, hit the bell, all that kind of thing. Tell your friends, tell people about the show if you like what we're doing here. And you know, these are interesting. I never know how it's going to turn out. I never know who or if someone's going to call in, but man, I feel like I've said it almost every episode. I feel like it's exactly where I want to be. So thank you for coming along with this, and let me know what you think about folding iterations into this. If you've got some thoughts around that, if you've got thoughts around a newsletter, what that could or should be. I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear from you. And I will see you. Well, I won't see you, but I'll talk to you next week. Also, is the 5 o'clock time working, both in the U.S. and those of you who might be listening in Europe or the UK? Does this time slot work for you? Let me know in the comments, or talk back at jeffreysaddoris.com, or find me on Instagram or Twitter. And thanks again. We'll see you next week.